By explaining the various stakeholders. So, stakeholders are anyone with direct interest in the performance of a business. So, here are just some examples. So, you have consumers who generally want the firm to perform as well as possible so that they can receive the best quality products and services. Then you have employees who most likely want the firm to perform well so that they can receive higher wages and income. Then you have the government, whose income generally depends on how many goods and services the firm sells, as they collect taxes from these firms. And then you have banks, who issue loans to firms. So if the firm performs well, they can the loans that they issue to the firm can be repaid much faster.
So now we will be looking at the market force of demand. Demand is the want and willingness of consumers to buy goods or services. So for something to qualify as demand, the consumers will, of course, desire the good and be able to pay for it. Only if these two criteria are filled, then it will count as demand. So on the graph on the left, this is a demand curve. The demand curve, as you can see, is a negative curve as it follows the law of demand, which means that as price increases, demand decreases. So if we choose this as our original point, we can see that as we move up, which is called a contraction in demand, the price is increasing from 30 to 50, and so the demand falls, which is why it's called a contraction. If we decrease the price from 30 to 10, it's an extension in demand. More people are willing to buy it because it's cheaper, and so demand increases. So when drawing any curve in economics, you'll of course have to label the axis. So in a demand curve, you have price on the y-axis and quantity demanded on the x-axis. So here we can see extensions and contractions in demand. These are when the prices of the good itself are changed. No new demand curve is drawn and it's all on the same curve. However, here we look at the shifts in demand. When non-price determinants occur, determinants that are not associated with the price directly. So for a demand curve, the original demand curve, to shift to the right into a new curve or shift to the left into this curve, it will have to undergo some form of non-price determinant. And here are the main ones. So a change in the overall level of incomes for consumers, because the more incomes, like the higher an income a consumer has, the more they can buy with it, and so demand would go to the right. The second one, changes in taxation on income. The higher the taxes on income, the lower the disposable income, or the income that they have to spend on other goods. And so the higher the taxes, the lower the amount of goods you can buy with that income, and so demand falls to the left, or shifts to the left. The third one is prices or availability of other goods and services. And there are two types of goods we'll look at here. So complementary goods. These are goods with linked demands, such as a printer and ink. If the demand for a printer goes up, of course the demand for ink will also go up because you need ink for printers to work. Substitutes are, for example, Pepsi and Coke. If the price of Pepsi were to increase, the demand for Pepsi would go down because it's now more expensive. And so the demand for Coke will increase because more people will shift over to Coke. So if the price of Pepsi were to increase, that would mean the demand of Coke would increase. And so the demand of Coke would shift to the right, like this. Other determinants include changes in taste and fashion. For example, a new trend may make a certain brand of shoe, more popular, and so the demand will shift to the right. Other determinants include population change. The higher the population in a country, the higher the demand, because more people are there to demand things. And lastly, other factors. This includes the weather, for example, for ice creams. Ice creams are normally eaten during the summer when it's hot. And so you can see a large spike in demand for ice creams and other cold things during summer. And since this is a factor that's not linked to price directly, for example, when summer comes, the demand will shift to the right for ice creams.
So then we have supply. So supply is the amount of goods and services that firms want to sell at different possible prices. So as the price of a good increases, firms want to sell more goods and services because the amount and the revenue they'll receive from selling at a higher price will increase. So that serves an incentive to increase their supply. So for example, if we're initially the supply of a good, the price of a good is at $30, for example, the quantity supplied will be around 25. But if you increase the price to around $50, the quantity supplied will increase to 40 units. So this is, as I mentioned before, this is because the higher price will serve as an incentive for firms to increase their supply. So any changes in the price of a good will cause a change in the quantity supplied. So that will cause a change in the quantity supply. But there are also factors that can affect. So there are factors other than price that can affect the quantity supplied. So when price changes, the supply, we looked at how when price changes, the quantity supplied changes accordingly. So for example, if it was $30 and the supply would be at 28, and if it changed to $20, the supply would be around 18. But if one of these non-price determinants change, the entire supply curve shifts. So for example, if the cost of factors of production increase, for example, one of the factors of production are labor, this would mean it would be less profitable for the firm to produce the good. So for each price possible, the supply of the good will decrease. So this will cause a shift in the supply curve. So for example, previously at $30, the firm is producing 28 units. But with the shift in supply curve, at $30, they're only producing around 15 units. This is because, as I mentioned previously, it's much less profitable due to the increase in factors of production. So they'll produce less of that good. However, if the cost of production decreases, the supply curve will shift to the right because it becomes more profitable, which serves as an incentive to increase the supply. So technology reduces the cost of factors of production, so supply curve shifts to the right. Price expectations, so this means the firm's expectations of prices in the future. So if they suspect that prices will increase in the future, they'll probably withhold some of their supply now so that they can sell at a higher price in the future. So that will cause a shift in the supply curve to the left at the current moment, because they want to save some of their supply for the future. So that cut on supply and quantity supplied for each price will decrease. Then taxes. So taxes are equivalent to increase in the cost of factors of production, which will cause a leftward shift in the supply curve. And subsidies are equivalent to a reduction in the cost of factors of production, which will cause a rightward shift in the supply curve. So, yeah.
So now we'll be looking at equilibrium. And as the name suggests, it is the price at which amount supplied equals or satisfies the amount demanded for a good or service. So now in this example graph, we can see that at the price of $30, the amount supplied of the supply curve and the amount demanded of the demand curve we have here are equal, or they meet, meaning that the amount supplied is equal to the amount demanded, and thus it's in equilibrium. There is a benefit in society as only the goods that are needed are supplied, meaning there's no wastage and there is proper allocation of resources to the production of this good. There's no deadweight loss, meaning there's no loss to society because of a wastage of resources in any way. But if we were to increase the price to $40, we can see that at this point, the amount demanded is less than the amount supplied, meaning there's a surplus. There's more than enough goods in the market and no one's buying them. This is a wastage of resources. So this is a situation called disequilibrium, where it's not equal. The same thing happens when we decrease the price from 30 to 20, another disequilibrium situation called shortage, because the amount demanded is higher than the amount supplied. There's a shortage of goods. There are not enough goods to satisfy all the consumers in the market. And so again, there's a misallocation of resources and inefficient production. So these two situations are disequilibrium situations, and they're not wanted by society. This is the optimal situation.
So price elasticity of demand is just how responsive demand is to a change in price. So how much demand changes when price is changed. So for example, if we look at a normal demand curve, we have price here and quantity here. When we change price, demand, the quantity demanded changes as well. But how much demand changes when price changes is known as price elasticity of demand. So to calculate PED, we can use this formula, the percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. So if the value you obtain here is greater than 1 using this formula, it's known as price elastic demand, and that means demand is very responsive to a change in price. And if the value obtained is less than 1, this means it's inelastic, and that means the quantity demanded is not very responsive to a change in price. And unitary elastic means that a percentage change in price produces a proportionally equal change in quantity demanded. So these determinants here are what determine how responsive demand is to a change in price. So if a good has a high degree of necessity, for example, clothing or food, the demand for the good will be inelastic. That's because consumers will have to purchase the good regardless of the change in price. So if you look at this diagram here, it shows inelastic demand where PED is less than 1, where change in price produced a proportionally smaller change in demand, quantity demanded. If the good takes a larger proportion of income, it'll have elastic demand where PED is greater than 1. This is because after a change in price, a large amount of consumers may no longer be able to consume the good or be able to afford the good after change in price. So that's why a change in price produces a larger change in quantity demanded. So for example, maybe cars or maybe houses would have, or very luxury or expensive houses would have elastic demand.
So now we'll be looking at PES, which stands for Price Elasticity of Supply. This is a tool used by many stakeholders, the government, the firm, or even consumers in different ways. So what it means, it measures the responsiveness of quantity supplied for a good or service to a change in price. This basically means when the price of a good is changed, it measures the amount of supply and how it has changed from before the price was changed. It measures the responsiveness of the change in quantity supplied. So the formula, as the definition suggested, is the percentage change in quantity supplied over percentage change in price. So say it changed from 300 units to 350 units. So we'd have 50 over 300 on the top. And the bottom, if the price was changed from $10 to $20, we'd have 10 over 10, which is just 1. So the number that we get at the end of the formula, if it is greater than 1, it's called price elastic, meaning the change in quantity supplied is greater than the change in price. If the final value is less than 1, it is called price inelastic, which means the percentage change in quantity supplied is less than the percentage change in price. If it's equal to 1, it's called unitary elastic. The percentage change in quantity supplied is equal to the percentage change in price. So there are various factors or determinants which affect the price elasticity of supply for a good. So the first one is the availability of stock of finished goods. This follows logically because if you have a lot of the good in stock ready to sell, already produced and already ready to sell, that means the price elasticity of supply will be higher because you can quickly bring those goods into the market. Second one is the amount of unused or spare capacity. So the more spare capacity you have, the more you can produce goods on shorter notice, which means the price elasticity of supply will be higher. The third one is the time period required to adjust scale of production. So if it is a very complicated or big good, such as a robot or a gadget, this means the time period will be very long. And so the price elasticity of supply will be low because it will take long to deliver into the market and the responsiveness will be very, very slow. But if it's a simple good, such as a matchstick, then the time period will be very low to adjust scale of production, and so the price elasticity of supply will be higher. It won't take much time to produce it, and so the responsiveness will be quicker. And lastly, the mobility and availability of factors of production. So this basically means, say a worker is the factor of production in this case, and he is shifted from farming cotton to farming rice. So since both jobs are in the same sort of sector, the mobility is very high here. It's the same sort of skill set and the mobility is higher, which means the responsiveness will be higher too. There'll be less of a complication as the worker is shifted. But if you're switching a farmer to a job requiring a lot of knowledge in the tech space, such as a software engineer, then of course the mobility will be very, very low because the farmer will have to learn everything again. So the responsiveness will be very, very low too. And of course, availability, the more factors of production and the resources you have available, the more you can produce of a good on shorter notice because you don't have to procure the goods. This means that the responsiveness will be higher and price elasticity of supply will also be higher in that case.